This audio is brought to you by Muslim Central. Please consider donating to help cover our running costs and future projects by visiting www.muslimcentral.com/donate.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity, streaming live on One Legacy Radio. Today we are talking about a very important and very serious issue, and alhamdulillah we are blessed to have an expert, inshallah, to discuss this issue with us. We are speaking today about the topic of depression, anxiety, and marital problems. Specifically, when we talk about depression and anxiety, unfortunately, within our community, there is a sort of, this is sort of a taboo topic. It's something that, if a person has a problem with their heart, or a person has a problem with their kidneys or their arm or their leg, it's okay to go to a doctor. But when someone has a problem emotionally, or someone has a mental health sort of issue, or any kind of psychological problem, it's considered a sort of taboo to go and seek help. And unfortunately, especially within our community, as Muslims, we have a lack of resources. I get countless messages every day, from people from all over the world who don't have these resources in their own communities, and they're just, they're looking for a place to get help. And this is something we need to talk about. It's something that we need to, we need to redefine a lot of the understanding that we've had thus far about these topics of mental health and depression and anxiety. And I think one of those myths, if you will, which inshallah we will be speaking with Sheikh Yassir about, is this idea that if a person is depressed or is going through, this type of, this is struggling with depression or anxiety, that it's their own fault, or that it's necessarily a consequence of low iman, or it's a problem with the person's faith, and therefore they're feeling this sadness or this depression. And this is something that we will find that if you look at the examples that we have in the Quran and the stories of the prophets themselves, peace be upon them, they also felt sadness. That sadness is something that is not necessarily only an emotion that those who are far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala experience. It's not just necessarily a consequence of low iman, but this is, for example, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that there's an expiation of our sins for those who are patient when they undergo sadness and worry, even if it's just the prick of a thorn. And in this hadith, what's mentioned in this hadith is actually the Prophet ﷺ says, if a believer a believer goes through these things, then they are it removes their sins like leaves falling from a tree. So we notice from this hadith that the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is saying that a believer is also going to go through these things. A believer also feels sadness. A believer also feels anxiety. That this is not something just saved for those without faith or those who are weak in faith. But this is one of the trials of this life, and we need to see it as such. That it doesn't say something about you as being more less strong or being a weak person, or maybe not grateful enough. And this is one of the sort of common, I think one of the most common comments that people who do suffer from depression or these types of struggles is that you just need to be more grateful. At least you're not like those people starving across the world. And while gratitude for sure has been found to across the board to increase your level of even just baseline happiness, this is very, very true, that gratitude is very powerful in terms of making, even increasing the baseline. People have a baseline, and this is true. However, I think it's dangerous to connect the two, in the sense of, if one is feeling feeling, that sense of depression or sadness, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's because they are an ungrateful person. It is true that gratitude and focusing on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and being grateful can definitely help to combat those feelings of sadness and those feelings of hopelessness and depression. However, it should not be used as a weapon and sort of as something to beat a person down and make them feel that you're an ungrateful person. But rather, it can be a tool, and for sure, gratitude is a tool. And this is something we teach to our children, that you can look at this concept of looking at the glass and how do you look at it. It is very powerful. There are some people who, when they see some water that's missing from a glass, instead of seeing it as being half full, they do see it as half empty. And this is, of course, this is a common cliche you hear, but it is very indicative of how people see the world, of the world view. When we look at a door that has just closed, sometimes we become so focused on the door that's closed that we miss the hundreds of doors that are open and the hundreds of doors that have opened for us. Part of the reason why we become overwhelmed, perhaps with sadness or with depression or hopelessness, has sometimes to do with our focus. What is it that our heart is focused on? And of course, there is a definite spectrum when it comes to matters of mental health. There's definitely a spectrum when it comes to depression, for example. And not all types of depression or sadness can be cured simply through spiritual methods. However, there is definitely a quite a bit of tools that we have in our tradition that can help a person who is struggling with these emotions. Again, it isn't to say that the sadness or the depression itself is because of a lack of spirituality, but rather within our tradition of spirituality, there are tools in order to enable us to come out of that and to help us. It doesn't necessarily cure all types of depression. It may not work for all people. However, it is something that we have, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these different means, and it's okay to use these means. As we are depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure us, but it is okay, of course, to still seek the means, knowing that if I go to a doctor, the doctor himself or herself is not the one who's curing me. If I take medication, it's not the medication itself that's curing me, but of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who cures, and Allah is the one in control. But that doesn't mean that I don't seek those means. I seek the means while knowing who really controls the means and who really is the one from which everything comes. It's important to have that balance and to have that focus and understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who can cure anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge and in control of everything. And yet I seek the means. I go and I look into the spiritual tradition. How can I what are some methods that are according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and lessons from those who came before us that can help with these struggles, as well as seeking the means from the dunya as well. And it's important that we don't limit ourselves, and we understand that one method may work for one person and it may not work for another. And inshallah we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy on all those who are struggling with these tests, and we need to really begin to see it in that way. It is not we sometimes we feel that these things may be an indication of there's something weak in me, or there's something wrong with me, or maybe I'm being punished, and we have to really completely redefine how we view these struggles. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people in different ways, and for some people their test is that they don't have a lot of money. For other people their test is that they don't have health. And for other people, maybe their test is this emotional struggle that they go through. This is part of dunya, is the fact that we are tested and we do struggle. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tools, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can lift us out of this. It isn't something that we have to just because it's a test, we don't have to just, passively give up. In fact, we should not passively give up, but we should continue to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift us out of it. And there are different ways, again, that one can do that. But what I really want to emphasize, and inshallah when we speak with Sheikh Yassir, he too will emphasize, this is something that we need to remove the stigma from. That this is not an indication of something's wrong with this person, or they have weak iman, or they must be just an ungrateful person. But it's a test like all other tests. You don't look at a person who is not very well off and say, well, it's just because they don't work hard enough, right? You don't say that. You don't look at a poor person who's struggling to make ends meet or is homeless and say, well, it's just because they didn't work hard enough, or they're just lazy. And it's very similar to say that a person who's struggling with depression, it's because they're an ungrateful person, or they don't have strong enough iman. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people in different ways, and perhaps this is that person's test and that person's struggle. We need to enable people and not cut them down. It's very important that we don't see these things as handicaps, but these are struggles and these are tests, and our job as a community is to provide services to help each other out. We provide services for those people who are not able to feed themselves and their families. We also need to provide services for those who are struggling from depression and anxiety, and it's just another form of like a struggle that they go through, another sort of imprisonment, and we want to help each other out. So inshallah, it's a lesson for all of us to be more empathetic towards one another. We always sometimes we see the world through our own lens, of course, and whatever we feel and whatever we experience affects how we view others and how we view the motivation of others. But we have to start to be able to step outside of that a little bit and realize that what other people experience is not like what I experience, and how I experience one event is not going to be the same way that another person experiences the very same event. We are all different, and so we have to start to be more tolerant and more empathetic and understanding of what other people are going through, and not to say, well, look at that person, why are they so upset about this little thing? Because you have not walked in that person's shoes, and you don't know what it feels like to be that person and to experience it in the way that person is. So we should be very careful, I think, about the judgment and just imposing our own experience and our own worldview and our own paradigm on other people, because everybody experiences the world differently. And what we should be doing, again, is helping each other out, inshallah, not cutting each other down. I will take a short break now, and when I return, I'll open it up for some questions, and then we will speak with Sheikh Yassir, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. This is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity, streaming live on One Legacy Radio. I want to remind all of you that One Legacy Radio is a non-profit, and we are supported by listeners. So I ask you to please do support the radio station by becoming a member. You can see the red button on top of the player. Please click on that button and support the radio station. Just $10 a month. It's less than $1 a day for us, but it really, really goes a long way for the radio station. So I ask you to become a member, and please encourage your sisters, your brothers, your friends, your family to also become members and to support the radio station. We want to keep shows like this on, and we want to continue to support and grow this very important endeavor of Muslim media. It's something that we complain about a lot, but there's somebody out there is doing something about it. Let's support them, inshallah. Please support the efforts that are already on the ground. And in that way and in that support, we are also helping ourselves, because This charity is considered a sadaqa jariyah, inshallah, a charity that continues to benefit people. And the Prophet ﷺ has said that anytime when we leave this world, when we pass away, all of our deeds are going to end except for three. There are three types of deeds that a person can do in this life while they're still alive, that continue to benefit him or her in their grave. And one of them is this sadaqa jariyah. It's a charity that we gave in this life, and it continues to benefit people even after we've passed away. And one of the other categories that our Prophet ﷺ mentions is any knowledge that we give to people that continues to benefit people after we pass away. So in both of these categories, giving to this cause, inshallah, can be counted on your scale as one of those, and inshallah continue to benefit you in your grave. So please do support this effort, become a member, keep these shows on air. That's what we want to do, and have this service for our communities, inshallah. So I'm taking questions at the chat box. You can also send your questions to serenity@onelegacyradio.com. So questions, let's see. Okay, so I have been struggling so long with the question whether seeking psychotherapy means failing, whether it means that I fail in my iman. And thank you for mentioning this, and thank you for asking this question, because this is the way that a lot of people view it, that somehow we have been taught that, it's okay to seek help from a doctor if I have a headache. It's okay to seek help from a doctor if I have pneumonia. And nobody says, wow, you're so weak. Why don't you just let your immune system take care of it, right? Why are you going and getting medicine for your disease? And yet, when it comes to issues of mental health, or issues of emotional or psychological health, it's completely different. And the idea is that this is something we're just supposed to, deal with on our own. Marital problems, again, also something, it's considered a sign of failure that you're seeking help. And that we need to really, really completely redefine these things, because the same way that you seek the help of a professional if you're sick, if your body is sick, the same way you seek the help of a professional, if you need medicine for any disease that you have, we also, it's not a sign of weakness to seek help for emotional problems, or for mental health issues, or for family problems. What it means is that you're doing your duty as a believer, of seeking the means to solve the problem. And of course throughout this process, we know, and this is what I emphasized before and I want to emphasize again, we know that the solution comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that our salvation and our cure is from Him. And He's the one who feeds us, and He's the one who protects us. But we're still asked to put the food in our mouth, right? If we were to sit and say, well, Allah is the one who feeds, so I don't need to eat the food, I would be held accountable, because I'm not taking care of the trust that Allah gave me in my body and in my health. And in the same way, although Allah is the one who protects, I still lock my doors at night, right? I still lock my car. These are means. These are things that we are told as part of our worship, as part of our ibadah, to engage in and to use. And in the same way, when I'm struggling with something, I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with a family problem, or a marital strife, that is something I should also seek the means to alleviate, and to do what I can to help, to do my part, basically. Just like I put the food in my mouth to feed my body, I need to take the means, knowing, of course, that the answer and the solution comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all things come from Allah. I still am required to do what I can, so it is not a failure on your part. It's you admitting that Allah subhanahu, you're admitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost that you need His help. And anyone who is not willing to admit that they need the help of Allah is in a lot of trouble. because we all need the help of Allah. And if I'm not able to admit that, then I'm in more serious trouble than the one who's admitting it. And so what we're doing first and foremost is we are saying, like Nuh alayhi salam, إني مغلوب فانتصر. In Nuh alayhi salam, he admit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm defeated. He's saying, I need you to give me the victory. And this is what we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We admit to Allah that we can't do it on our own. We admit to Allah that we need His help, and that we need His nasr, we need His victory, His help, and then we take the means. And part of that is seeking. Sometimes it's seeking the help of a doctor. Sometimes it's seeking help of a mediator, or whatever it is, given the situation. Not every situation is the same, of course, but the first step is to admit that we need the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then take the means. Someone says, I went through a really bad breakup a year ago and still haven't been able to get through it. I've turned to God and I know I have to have patience, but it's a struggle. What should I do to make myself patient and get through this hard time? May Allah make it easy for you. This is a struggle, and this is sometimes one of the hardest things is losing somebody that we care about, and it's for this reason that a lot of my writing actually is devoted to this question of losing, of separation, of what happens when you lose people that you love. I recently published a book, and much of it is devoted to this issue. And the book is called Reclaim Your Heart. But the idea here is that we love people and we love to have people around us. But really, when we suffer is when we make the people into our focal point instead of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't matter who the person is. The person could be my mother, my father, my children, my husband, my wife. Any person, it doesn't matter who they are. But if that person becomes the focal point of my life, of my existence, if that person becomes the orbit around which I, revolve my life, that's when we suffer. And that's when we tip the balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put. We go against the fitrah, the nature of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And that nature, the natural way of the human being, the fitrah that Allah has given us, is to make Allah at the center, is to make our life revolve around Him, and to make Him the ultimate love in our life. And sometimes we feel that we're turning to God, we feel like we're turning to Allah, but really, sometimes we are turning to Allah to get us to another person. And it's like the difference between the means and the end, the difference between the tool and what our actual goal is, the tool and the goal. Sometimes we turn to Allah as a tool instead of the end. Sometimes we turn to Allah to use Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to get me what I want. And what I want has nothing to do with Allah. For example, I want to be with a certain person. I turn to Allah in dua perhaps, or whatever, to get me that person. Maybe I want a certain job. So I turn to Allah to get me that job. I want a certain, career. And while, of course, there's nothing wrong with asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the things we want, I'm talking now about ultimate purpose. I'm talking about ultimate goals. Of course, Allah loves for us to ask Him and loves for us to make dua. But the problem is when my ultimate goal is not Allah. My ultimate goal is these things that I want in dunya, and I just use Allah like a genie, a genie in the bottle. A'udhu billah. I just make a wish, right? And when Allah doesn't give me my wish, I get frustrated because this genie isn't really working out for me. And this is where we really mess it up, because Allah is not the means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the tool to get to dunya. But dunya is supposed to be the means and the tool to get to Allah. And everything that I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, whether it's this person I want to be with, or this job, or this career, at the end of the day, I want those things, but why? Why do I ultimately want those things? And I think it's just an issue of stepping back and just looking at, well, what am I really doing here? And what is going to last? And what is my ultimate end? And if we put things in perspective properly, we'll find that Allah is the end, that everything else passes away, and everything else is not lasting, and everything else is actually given to us in order to seek Allah with it. And that's a really, really revolutionary realization, that everything we have in this life is actually just a tool, ultimately a means by which we can use in order to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, does that mean we don't love these things? No, of course we love these things, and they are gifts, and they are, as we're told in the Quran, we ask, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. We ask in the dua that's mentioned in the Quran, Oh Allah, hab lana, meaning give us the gift. It's a hiba is a gift. So we're asking Allah to gift us with making our spouses and our children the coolness of our eyes. So this is part of the mata', the pleasure of dunya, is to have, the coolness of our eyes be in those people around us. But the problem, again, is that the coolness of my eyes is not the same as my ultimate goal and my ultimate end. I can live with or without coolness in my eyes, but I cannot live without my ultimate goal and my ultimate end. And so it's important that we are clear which part of this, of this dunya is something that is given and may be taken, which part is the means, which part is the tools, and which part is the end, and what exactly is it that's lasting, and what is my ultimate purpose. So the reason I say this is sometimes when things get taken away from us and we find ourselves unable to sort of go on, or it just completely debilitates us, it may be an indication that my center of gravity was wrong, that my focal point and that around which I had revolved my life, my orbit, was off center. Instead of it being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was something else. And it may have been another person, and it may have been my job, or it may have been making money, but it was something else. And so the pain of that loss is actually an indicator to us that we need to refocus and find that proper center, which is La ilaha illallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only thing that should be at the center. Inshallah, I will take another short break, and when we return, we will be with Sheikh Yassir, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, this is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity on One Legacy Radio. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We are very excited today to have Sheikh Yassir Fazaga with us. Sheikh Yassir is an inspiring multilingual speaker sought after from USA through Canada to the Middle East and Far East. He was born in Eritrea and moved to the United States at the age of 15. He has a bachelor's in Islamic studies from the Institute of Islamic and Arabic Sciences in Virginia. He has completed all his coursework for his master's degree in marriage and family counseling from the California State University of Long Beach. And he is currently undertaking his master's in theology at Loyola Marymount University. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Yassir.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sister Yasmin, to you and to all the listeners out there. A belated Ramadan Mubarak to you. And Eid is only in 2 days, so Eid Mubarak to you and to all your listeners as well.
Thank you, Sheikh Yassir. And may you, inshallah, have a blessed Eid as well. We want to begin today, and the topic, because you are, alhamdulillah, in this field, and I think it's a field that is very much underrepresented in the Muslim community, and you deal a lot with family therapy and counseling. I want to ask you at the beginning, why do you think that it's something that's very important in our community to have this type of, this facility and this sort of, service out there?
Okay, just a small correction there, Yasmin. Alhamdulillah, I have completed my master's. I believe you said that I have completed the work for my work.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah, I am done with this. And I was very inspired by my studies, and alhamdulillah, I'm undertaking a PhD program now in spirituality integrated psychotherapy.
Oh, mashallah.
And this is Alhamdulillah, and this is all coming from the need that I have witnessed as an imam in our community. You know, our community is very trusting of the imams, something that we absolutely, we're privileged to have, and we're really honored that we have had the trust of our community members. People call the imams, and they want to consult us about anything and everything that is out there. And in the capacity of an imam myself, I felt that I was very ill-prepared in dealing with all the issues that the community was bringing to me. And honestly speaking, quoting them a verse from the Quran, telling them that this is halal or haram, was just not doing it. People needed a lot more than that. And like you said, I mean, there is just so much pain out there and so many challenges that people have. And alhamdulillah, I mean, I think we're getting there, but not as much as what is needed to be out there. And remember also that there are many cultural taboos that come in with counseling or visiting a mental health professional. People think that it's only for insane and crazy people, or people usually, the way that they view mental illness or family issues to be indicative of a weak iman or a weak will, or just a weak person who is unable to do things on their own. So I think that it is multiple things that makes this topic, this issue, so very relevant to our community, and it is so badly needed, and there will never be enough people to undertake such a mission.
You know, Jazakallah khair, you bring up so many important points. One of them being the need for this service, and also the fact that it is, it is a taboo, and it's something I think we do need to move beyond. And then finally, the very important point that you made about having these problems, whether you're seeking counseling or mental health issues, or if you're seeking counseling for marriage or other family issues, that it isn't, this automatically an indication of weak iman. And I think that is a misunderstanding a lot of people have, and alhamdulillah that you did clarify that. Now, on that note, what would you say, from your experience, is the most common problem that you're finding in our communities, and what within our families? What would you say is one of the most common problems that you're witnessing?
When it comes to families, and by the way, if we can just revisit that idea of mental illness, family problems are not an indication of weak iman, especially when it comes to things like depression or anxiety. I mean, we've got clear hadith from the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he says, "Ma asaba al-mu'mina min hammin wala hazanin," that nothing that afflicts a believer, be it sadness, grief, or depression. And here the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that believers actually do go through anxiety, they have their worries, they go through depression. And what happens is that I think people think that if you are a believer, by default or automatically, you are saved from things such as depression and anxiety. And that is not true. That is absolutely false. What happens though is that religion gives you enough tools that even when you are depressed, you don't go into the state of desperation or going into despair. So what happens is that these are the tools that the religion gives you. But because you're a believer, it doesn't really mean that you are automatically saved from depression, anxiety, or any other sort of mental illness. You've got words such as huzn associated with Yaqub alayhi salam, the father of Yusuf alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, that his eyes became blind due to sadness. And usually sadness does not cause blindness. But in some mental situations, in some cases, there is a spiritual or there is a mental issue that manifests itself in a physical form. Or the word gham is associated with Yunus alayhi salam, for example. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نادى في الظلمات لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين فنجيناه من الغم. That Yunus alayhi salam was going through this idea of gham, which is, just an overwhelming sense of sadness, and the source of it is unknown, and so on. So, for the listeners out there, I really just want to say depression simply means that the pain that you're going through is too much and the tools that you have are not sufficient. That's really what it means.
SubhanAllah. May Allah bless you. Barakallah feek. This is such an important message we need to get out there. Inshallah, may Allah reward you for that and for the explanation, emphasis on that point.
I mean, alhamdulillah, like I said, these are topics that I'm really, really passionate about. Simply, many times when we give these types of clarification, I think it just makes it so much easier to go to the doctor, so much easier to come to counseling, so much easier to talk about these issues with professionals who can help. And I really appreciate a show like this, where it discusses issues that are very relevant. I give you an example, Yasmin. Every time, I give a khutbah, let's say, on depression. And you won't believe the line of people that will just come up afterwards. My niece is attempting suicide. My mom is on fazaga. I have a cousin who, is cutting. And I hear all these things. And I know that the khutbah does not cure it, but what happens is that it validates. It gives a lot of validation to the people who are either going through it or the family members who are suffering from it, and they feel that the message has got nothing to do with their suffering. And to me, that will just be a sense of betrayal to our community. I remember, for example, this last April, it was Autism Awareness Month. And I gave a khutbah on autism. And now you would think that autism has got no place in our community. And we did a workshop on autism. We had 25 Muslim families with autistic children come into our community, into that workshop. And when you have these numbers, and these are people who are coming in for the very first time, they're coming to the masjid, addressing something that they go through every single day. To me, I would say that is really what a masjid is supposed to be like, and that is addressing the issues that are of relevance to the masses, to the majority of people who are out there.
SubhanAllah. This is, SubhanAllah, this is something I've also experienced in the sense that, I get a lot of messages from people who don't know where to go. It's this sort of common theme of, I have this problem, and a lot of people struggling with these types of issues, and they might feel ashamed to go to, their community leaders, or they don't necessarily have those resources in their communities.
And I think, this is where we really need to do a better job with the way that we equip our Islamic centers. Many times I think that a lot of emphasis is given to the skeleton of the building and not the spirit of the building. Mm-hmm. And I think that it really is about time that, be it in our activities, be it in the spirit of the masjid that we have, that our masjid becomes a place where everybody is welcome. SubhanAllah, I remember as in my training, and SubhanAllah, there are many Islamic aspects in counseling. I remember the very first thing that you as a therapist, as a counselor, you are expected to provide for your clients is not the brilliant answers, is not the great arguments, is not the beautiful pop talks, it's not about inspiring them. The very first thing that you do as a counselor, as a therapist, is to provide a safe place for your clients to be. Something that reminds me of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where people would just come to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they felt so safe around him, and they felt so unbelievably accepted, despite of what it is that they have done. They knew that they can always go to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and speak to him. So the idea of just creating a safe place where people feel that they can belong, drop their mask, and just be and tell it like it is, without being afraid of being judged, without afraid of being evaluated accordingly to the problem that they are sharing with you as a counselor and as a therapist. That in itself is very therapeutic, and it is very healing. I have had people who come to me and they say, I've been suffering from this problem for the past 22 years. I am married, I have children, my parents are around. I have not spoken to my children, I have not spoken to my parents, I have not even spoken to my spouse about it. And here, a total stranger coming into the office, alhamdulillah, hopefully feeling safe and accepted, and just something that they have had in their heart for 20 years or more, and now they felt it was safe enough for them to share.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I think we're so much of, we think that being righteous it means that, now we can start to point fingers and to judge others, and it's so important to have that space where people do not feel judged. Now, in your research, have you found, from an Islamic point of view, as well as from the training that you have, what have you found to be some of the best coping mechanisms? I know you mentioned that depression happens when there's more that someone is dealing with than they have the tools to cope. What have you found to be some of the best coping mechanisms?
And here is the thing. There is no coping mechanism that works for everybody. Mm-hmm. So what you do in counseling is that somehow you tailor it, you modify it so that it is of benefit to most people who are out there. The one theory that I found to be very, in parallel with the teachings of Islam, and I've actually seen this in the writings of, Muslim theologians, ethicists, and such as Ibn al-Qayyim, al-Ghazali, and what have you. There is a theory out there, it's called CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And basically, the principle of that theory is that our emotions are the result of the kind of thoughts that we keep. Every thought that we have is really the child, or every emotion that we have is rather the child of a thought. So if we are able to become more aware of our thoughts, then what happens is that we will have better clarity as far as what are the type of thoughts that are creating negative emotions. And if we can control the thoughts that are creating such type of emotions, then we can harbor better, more positive emotions. And usually when I tell this to people, the first objection that they have is, wait a minute, I do not control what kind of thoughts come into my mind. And supposedly in psychology we are taught that a human being is bombarded with about 70,000 thoughts a day. And that is a lot of thoughts. So now, what we say is that you are right, we do not control the thoughts that come into our mind, but we definitely control which thoughts we want to dwell in. Mm-hmm. And thoughts are like a snowball. The more time you give them, the more power they accrue, the more intense they become, the more unstoppable they be. So what happens now is that we teach coping skills, such as thought-stopping skills. How do you pay attention to your thoughts? Becoming more aware of your thoughts. So that this way you become aware of, our emotions really, again, I cannot stress this enough, they really are the birth of our thoughts. Control the thoughts, and that will generate better emotions.
SubhanAllah, that it reminds me of this quote. I think also one of the theologians that you mentioned about watching the khawatir, the very first kind of the pre-thought, because then it becomes a full thought, and then the thought that's not controlled then becomes eventually becomes a himma, a desire, and then you end up becoming an action and then a habit, and it's kind of those different steps. I think where you can control it towards the beginning.
Yeah, and that's precisely that quote you said is from Ibn al-Qayyim.
Yes.
And it really is very beautiful, but it really is the snowball effect, and that is, it's just a khatir, it's a passing thought. You spend time on it, then it becomes a desire, and you fantasize about it, and the more time you spend into it, the more of a azima and irada. It becomes a commitment, a dedication, and a very strong want, and so on. But that would be like some of the things that we would talk about. And interestingly also is that people are unaware of the contribution of Muslim psychologists into the field of psychology. One of my favorite classes to teach is I teach this class called Islam and Psychology. And it's a weekend course that I teach. And in it we discuss all the different types of contributions that Muslim psychologists have made. One of my favorites, and I think you would like it, Yasmin, and I think your listeners would like it as well. You've heard about AA meetings, right?
Yes.
Okay. So AA meetings are supposedly, it initially started as a movement to help people who were, suffering with alcohol, and alcohol is a challenge to them, call them alcoholics or alcoholism. So what happens is that there was this, it actually was a movement that started by a psychologist by the name of Carl Jung. And somehow religion or spirituality was integrated in part of the AA meetings, the 12 steps. And what is nice is that one of the psychologists who had most influence on Carl Jung is actually Ibn Sina, Abyssinia. And it was actually on the basis of him being influenced by Ibn Sina that Carl Jung came up with the AA type of meetings in order to help people with their alcoholism, for example. The very first time that it was suggested that mental illness is no longer the result of demon possession, which was the belief throughout Europe and throughout the Christian world. If you have got mental issues, it meant that you were possessed by the demon. And in Christianity, you know, in the Bible, in the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, Jesus takes the demons out of people in 31 different places and times. So what happens is that it became so ingrained into the minds of people that anytime you're having these mental issues, you must be possessed by the demons. And the way that they did it is that they would drill a hole in your skull in order for the bad spirits to leave the person. Very inhumane, very painful, and of course, obviously it did not work out. But then it was, you know, Islam that came in and they said, yeah, maybe people are not, and this is in Surah An-Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the concept of sufaha. And a safi is a person who is of weak mind and cannot really make good judgment. And in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, such a person maybe is not fit to be in charge of financial aspects. So Allah said, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ. But then all of a sudden, it also made the command that you ought to provide for them, that you ought to clothe them. And then most interestingly, Allah said, وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا وَمَعْرُوفًا. And that is to speak to them with a splendid voice. So now the idea is go beyond the judgment, take care of the person. And it was actually on the basis of these verses and the alike that Muslim psychologists moved from, you know, the idea that this is demon possession into looking into the idea of what people go through, what they go through, can we make it better? And you just move on. And subhanAllah, it's just a beautiful, beautiful history of the contributions that Muslims have made.
SubhanAllah. And you know, sometimes that's very much neglected. You know, I actually found the quote that you were referring to, and it says, you should repulse a thought. If you do not do so, it will develop into a desire. You should therefore wage war against it. If you do not do so, it will become a resolution and firm intention. If you do not repulse this, it will develop into a deed. If you do not make up for it by doing the opposite of that evil deed, it will become a habit. It will then be very difficult for you to give it up. And I think that brings us into, you know, the concept of when you get into addictions, you know, and how do addictions develop, and how do these habits become much harder to break. Now, have you dealt a lot with this topic of addictions?
Unfortunately, I have. And believe it or not, Yasmin, one of the most common addictions in our community is actually addiction to pornography. Unfortunately, both amongst young males and females, actually I shouldn't really be saying the word young, but this is one of the most common. I mean, in society out there, supposedly 25% of the divorce out there, they take place because addiction or some sort of, it's either gambling or addiction to porn is responsible for it. There is a great book out there. It's called Pornland, and it just speaks about the porn industry and how it impacts marriages and it impacts young men and women. But in my own practice, what I have seen is, unfortunately, addiction to porn is unfortunately very common.
And have you found that there are, are there services, for this particular issue? I have also, been contacted by people who are looking for help with this particular addiction. Are there resources for specifically Muslims dealing with this issue?
I guess thank you for the opportunity to advertise here. But at Access California. Okay. Access California is a family resource center where we help people who have different types of challenges, but mainly personal and that's in our mental health department. People who are going through these issues, we help them by providing counseling, and we have about 4 counselors on our staff. Myself and 3 other sisters who speak in different languages. We speak Arabic, of course, English, and I think we speak Farsi as well, or Pashtun. And this is a place where people can come in. Again, everything that they share with us is very strictly confidential. We have both the legal and the ethical responsibility to make sure that we help them in the most respectful way of their person as well as of their confidentiality. But this would be a great place for people to contact for our services.
And
now,
I'm sorry. Could you mention where you're located?
Well, we are in the city of Anaheim, and people can visit our website and find out more information at accesscal.org. That is accesscal, C-A-L for California.org. And we are in the heart of the city of Anaheim, and that's a beautiful place for people to begin.
And that's absolutely a necessity. One thing that we'll find is that many of the listeners are international as well. And would you say that there's any plans for the future, or do you know of any sort of services that they may be able to access online or remotely in any way?
Unfortunately, at this point, I don't.
Okay.
As far as we are concerned, in our capacity as counselors, we cannot. We are only licensed to practice in the state of California.
Okay.
So, for example, when people call me, I speak to them in the capacity of an imam. And I give them all the tips that I would have given them as a therapist. But I cannot claim the credit for my hours to get my license.
I see.
But inshallah, what we're hoping for is that we are currently working on a website that should be up and running. It's called Break the Shackles. And Break the Shackles is going to be a hub, a resource for people to come in. It'll be breaktheshackles.com or .org. I know that it's coming up very soon. And what it would be is that it will be a hub for people to find different types of resources.
Alhamdulillah, and may Allah bless all your efforts. This is absolutely, it's desperately needed, based on, just the experience, the little experience that I've had, with people contacting me. It's very much needed, and I hope that inshallah Allah blesses your efforts. And I want to thank you, Jazakallah khair, for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. And we hope inshallah to have you on again, because this is so desperately needed. Jazakallah khair to Sheikh Yassir Fazaga. And we hope, inshallah, to have him on again very soon.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Yasmin. And again, Eid Mubarak to you and to the listeners out there.
Thank you. And to you and your family, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
غرباء 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 غرباء